we are actively already thinking about in what ways are we going to support the community economically, and what ways are we going to partner with churches or other safe spaces to literally protect people that are going to be targeted with these mass deportations.
That's Dulce Guzmán, the new executive director of Alianza Américas, a coalition of dozens of Latin American and Caribbean immigrant-led organizations across the United States, on the possibility of a second Trump term with under 2 weeks until the U.S. election. I'm Roman Gressier, the editor of Faro English, and this is the first episode of Central American Minutes, our weekly dispatch on key stories from the region.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
they say globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes on El Faro English.
It's Friday, October 25th. We'll get back to Trump versus Harris in a few minutes. But first, last Saturday, renowned Guatemalan publisher Jose Rubén Zamora was released on house arrest after spending 27 months in the military prison Mariscal Zavala. Zamora was arrested on July 29, 2022, and accused of money laundering in a case mounted in 3 days, as prosecutors themselves admitted. He denounced psychological torture upon his incarceration, including sleep deprivation, sexual humiliation, and bedbug infestations. Accused of money laundering, the ensuing judicial process put arbitrariness in a public showcase. A dozen defense attorneys resigned under threat of prosecution. A court ordered probes of reporters covering the trial, or belonging to El Periódico, the daily newspaper he founded in 1996, which collapsed due to financial suffocation during the trial. Much of his staff fled the country, and the paper's digital archive vanished from the internet. In a conviction emblematic of the lawfare of the Alejandro Yamatei presidency in Guatemala, Zamora was sentenced in June 2023 to 6 years in prison, despite, crucially, the lack of evidence of illicit origins of the funds he had allegedly laundered. Similar to the tactics used against Alexei Navalny in Russian court, Zamora's jailers piled on additional charges, accusing him of procedural crimes during his own trial, in order to keep him in prison despite the annulment of that sentence and the order of a retrial months later in October 2023. For months, prosecutors sought to delay proceedings by any means possible, including by not appearing in court. One lead prosecutor seemed to fall asleep in court last week, feigning disinterest after being ordered to appear. But that day, October 19th, a judge ordered that Zamora be placed under pretrial house arrest as he faces the multiple ongoing cases against him. For this decision, the judge, too, faced direct threats of prison or exile from the prosecution itself. This is his son, Jose Carlos Zamora.
This weekend, after 813 days of arbitrary detention, my father, journalist Jose Rubén Zamora, regained his freedom. At last, he can defend himself as he always should have, free from a baseless and abusive process. We are delighted by this long-awaited moment, and we are deeply grateful for the support and solidarity that sustained us. There is still a long road ahead, but this marks a victory for my father, our family, and freedom of the press in Guatemala.
Now to El Salvador. Last Friday, on the same day as the Zamora house arrest order, a court in Sensuntepeque exonerated 5 anti-mining leaders, known internationally as the Santa Marta Five, who had been accused of murdering a woman in 1989. That was during the Salvadoran Civil War, when the men were FMLN guerrilla combatants. Dartmouth academic Jorge Cuellar was present as a courtroom observer.
The trial of the Santa Marta Five was, generally speaking, adequate. This is not to say that it was an elaborate process, but there was minimal justice that was being imparted through the proceedings. What was really clear for us as international observers was that Salvadoran judicial process is rather opaque and oftentimes is administered behind closed doors. And so even us being present to observe some of the proceedings was a huge plus that wasn't expected, especially.
The men are leaders of the Economic and Social Development Association in Santa Marta, or ADES. The association denounced the case as retaliation against environmentalists, warning of a possible reactivation of metallic mining in the country. Before we get to our last segment of the day, I have something important to ask of you. This year, El Faro turned 26. That's over 2.5 decades of translating, documenting, chronicling, and now podcasting Central America. You can support independent journalism in Central America by joining our crowdfunding community at support.elfaro.net. And be sure to click that subscribe button. Drop us a review. Our mantra this year at El Faro English is simple. Journalism must go on. Last, we return to the United States, where the November 5th election will have perilous implications for Central American diaspora communities. In an interview on October 23rd, Dulce Guzmán of Alianza Américas told us that the coalition is bracing for the social and economic fallout of the mass deportation campaign that Donald Trump has promised if he returns to the presidency. 1 million people per year will be deported, his campaign has pledged, which, according to the American Immigration Council, would cost federal institutions $88 billion a year and could trigger a recession deeper than 2008. Guzmán says immigrant rights groups are on a tight schedule. El Salvador's temporary protected status, or TPS, is up for renewal in 5 months in March 2025. Honduras and Nicaragua's designations extend until July of next year.
Even before Biden leaves office, there's going to be a huge push to make sure that there is a redesignation for El Salvador as the deadline, is coming up. But the reality is that if Trump does come into office, that will be challenged. I do think that we are seeing that it's going to be harder to do or to use the litigation strategy, just because I think that the administration now has more experience, has had time to really think about what avenues to use to execute some of their plans. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight.
Guzmán is 30 years old, a woman born in Mexico, and a DACA recipient. While Mexican-born people account for around 80% of beneficiaries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are the next largest groups. The Biden administration is facing legal challenges after seeking to convert the program, which was created by executive order in 2012, into federal regulation. Guzmán expects DACA, which as of last year numbered around 580,000 recipients, to ultimately be struck down by the Supreme Court, regardless of who wins in November. As for the possibility of a Harris presidency, she suspects inroads with the administration would be hard to come by.
I think it's still going to be difficult, maybe not as difficult under a Trump administration, but it will be difficult to really push them to not only extend TPS designations, but also redesignate for some countries that have not had it for a long time.
This is the first glimpse of the interview Guzmán granted to me and Nelson Rauda. Look out for the full written conversation next week on our homepage at elfaro.net/en. Thanks for listening to Central American Minutes, an original podcast from El Faro English. I wrote today's episode with production and an original soundtrack by Omnion. For more of our award-winning reporting from the region, be sure to go to our front page and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Hasta pronto.